Hello, everyone, and welcome to Three Words, a bite-sized podcast about the simple and yet strategic choices that we all can make in order to become better versions of ourselves. My name is Dr. Michael Brown, and I am the host of Three Words, and I'm here with a very common guest, a part of my DMB coaching team on our Three Words podcast, the young, the good-looking, the dynamic Casey Greenawalt. Casey, thanks for being here in this socially distanced space. Here on the campus of Bowling Green State University. And friend, I am so excited to have this particular conversation with you because I think it's something that we all deal with.
Yeah.
To one degree or another, one form or another, we all deal with battling these three words. Share them with me.
Well, thanks for having me today. I'm pumped to be here. Our three words for today are stop comparing yourself.
Stop comparing yourself. One of the things I speak about often are threats to being the best version of yourself. And I actually have spoken about the three threatening C's to actually going backwards and becoming the best version of yourself, becoming the worst version of yourself. And those C's are cynicism, complaining, and thirdly, our topic for today, comparison. So as we kind of begin the conversation, let me just say this. I think there's a difference between comparison and comparing. They're not the same. Comparison is when I look at someone and I think you have what I don't have. I wish I had it and I wish you did not. It's rooted in jealousy.
Yeah.
Comparison is I want to take from you what is yours and make it mine. Whereas comparing, I think, is really positive. It's not rooted in jealousy. It's actually rooted in a fuel for positive change. So for instance, I could say, Casey, I think you have fantastic hair and I am jealous. In fact, I wish you didn't have that hair because you have that fantastic hair. It makes me feel bad about myself. Instead saying, no, I actually like your hair and I'm going to get my hair cut just like you. Where do you get your hair cut?
There you go.
A more meaningful example would be if I admire something about someone in regards to their character qualities or their competencies. Well, I can actually begin to model that person. I can begin to be mentored by that person. I can begin to mimic their choices, their behaviors so that I also could become that kind of individual. That's a positive comparing and saying, I like that.
Right.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
Or I want to do that as well.
It's a good point. I think it's a nuanced conversation, just like you said, because we do it all the time. We see people, what they wear. We scroll through social media, which we'll talk more about later. We see maybe their finances or trips they're taking. And we're like, I want that. And I think you made a great point that jealousy is saying, I don't want them to have that, but I want that instead. Yeah. So, for me, I think what I find pretty consistently is there are a few people in my life who are a couple stages ahead of me in their life, whether they have kids or maybe they have a bigger house than I do, or they're farther along in their career. And it's really, really easy to look at everything they have, everything that they're a part of and want it and wish that maybe they didn't want it. It's so easy to get caught in that trap. And I think the key is to identify when am I starting to feel, versus just looking at them and saying, I want that. And the feeling goes to, I don't want them to have that. To identify the moment where you switch that perspective, I think that's really, really important to do.
Well, and we were talking about some examples even off camera. I know for me, I was really overweight as a child and did not eat healthy and didn't have those rhythms in my life. And so as I've continued to get healthier and healthier and healthier as I progress through life and now even crossing that 50-yard line, which is interesting as we sit in a place right behind the football stadium. As I cross that 50-yard line, I'm really becoming very proactive in that regard. And I love who I'm becoming. And I love that I'm healthier at 50 than I was at 40. And yet it's hard because I'm comparing myself to others who are 30 years younger. And I wish I had this and I wish I had this build. And it just becomes a trap.
Totally.
We talk about the comparison trap. And so I want to be able to think, how do I become the best version of me?
Yeah.
Versus how do I become more like you?
Right.
And that's what I struggle with. I don't know if you deal with some of those issues.
We were talking a little bit, I think, earlier on in my, what I call it, professional career. As I learned that I had a gift to public speak, I would listen to a lot of different people who were good at speaking, whether it was people in church world or radio hosts or podcasters. And what I would find is that as I would listen to them, I would start to talk like the one that I was listening to more than the rest of them, because I was
interesting.
Yeah, super fascinating, right? And so I had to catch myself. I had a friend of mine who was like, "You sound just like oh, whoops. Yep. I'm listening to them a little too much. Not that that's a bad thing to pick up some traits for them. But it can turn unhealthy really easily. So I don't know what that looks like for you listening, but I'm sure there's something you want to get better at. And I think it can be really, really easy to look at everybody else who maybe is better at something that you are and start to have those feelings of jealousy creep in and inadequacy. Another example I think about too is finances. My brother-in-law is so good with his finances. They go on vacations all the time. I mean, it's crazy. He utilizes the point system with credit cards. We could do a whole podcast on that probably. But it's amazing to see him do that. And I could very easily, get upset and jealous and wish that I was there and wish he wasn't going. But there's choices that he's made to get there. And what the better posture is to look at him and say, what has he done to get to where he is? Because I can learn from that. Right. And that's where comparison isn't unhealthy. It's actually helpful. But again, being able to identify where does my perspective shift is really, really important.
And we talk a lot about choices and the power of choices here at D&B Coaching and on the 3 Words podcast. And so I can actually make choices to achieve those things. And so what's typically happening in this whole comparison conversation is we want what other people have without putting in the work that they put in to get what they have.
Yeah, exactly.
And whether in any dimension of our lives, there are things that people are accomplishing. We all have the same, 168 hours a week. And the difference between the person who is achieving in many regards, not 100%, but in many regards, it's how we invest that time. It's the choices that we're making. And it's easy to go, oh, I want that, without needing to save the money for that, without meaning, for me, as I use the example of fitness, getting to the gym. Fitness begins with a fork. So I'm going to eat less donuts and less cake and less chocolate chip cookies. There's choices we can make. My concern for the listeners, my concern for those who are hearing us today, and even for my friend Casey and for myself, is that comparison, not comparing, but comparison is often the thief of contentment.
Yeah, totally.
And so I think that we desire to be content with who we're becoming, which I think is a great thing. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I want to settle.
Totally.
That doesn't necessarily mean that I want to be right where I am. It's okay to be where you are, but don't stay where you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to continue to move forward, and I want to continue to progress all the way to the end of my life. I don't want to coast, but I also don't want to spend the last half of my life comparing myself to others.
I have a question for you. How do you balance that tension? Like, how do you identify where maybe this, I'm comparing, it turns into comparison, turns into an unhealthy feeling inside?
Well, I think you mentioned social media. I think challenges, even with, I follow a couple of fitness apps because particularly during the quarantine, my gym is now open, but during quarantine, I was following some of the different, social media celebrities who are fitness folks because they were teaching us how to do workouts at home.
Yeah.
And that's all I had at the time. But then over time, I'm finding like, wow, this is really helpful. I'm becoming a better version of me. Oh, it turns. Why don't I look like that?
I was just going to say, why don't I look like that? Yeah.
Why don't I have that kind of workout equipment? Yeah. Why don't I have, those are cool shorts. I need shoes like that. I need those. And it becomes this jealousy. It becomes this kind of, instead of saying, I'm going to be the best version of me.
Because when you lean into that, I think for me, I know it's helpful is I have friends in my life who check me, who go, why? Let's say you show up in all Lululemon clothes the next day because you followed some fitness guy who wears all Lululemon and you bought a new workout machine to put in your basement. And it's like, what? Michael, what are you doing? That's not you, right?
It's not me.
And I think that's a good indicator is when you start to lean into those parts of the other people that aren't you. Yes, learn from them. Yes, compare and start to figure out how can I make myself better from what they're doing. But when you start to become someone you're not, whether that's, like I said, mentioned earlier, public speaking, you don't sound like yourself, or whether that's, what you wear and how you dress and how you talk.
There we go. You've just nailed it. Becoming someone you're not.
Yeah.
And that's really the desire is to actually, I want to be me. I want to feel great in my own skin. I want to be fully me. I don't want to be you.
Yeah.
In fact, I want to celebrate you.
Yeah.
I want to celebrate your style, maybe the way you communicate, the way you look. I want to celebrate your accomplishments. Comparison avoids celebration of others.
Yeah.
Comparison, it causes me to be preoccupied 100% with myself and what I don't have. It's interesting. You mentioned before we started this podcast that you have maybe this is why you've been so quiet, is that you've eliminated social media? Tell me about that.
Yeah, not completely. Part of my
Okay.
job, I have to stay plugged in it and see what's going on in the lives of students across our area. But I took the apps off my phone. I downloaded TikTok at the beginning of quarantine. And for those of you that know what TikTok is, you know that can just drain so much of your time because it's so easy to watch a 15-second clip of someone doing something with some audio over it. It's so easy. You're scrolling and you're an hour later, you're like, what was I doing here? Like I just wasted so much time. And with Facebook and Instagram, I think I found myself getting in that comparison game, seeing what everybody else was doing during quarantine, seeing maybe some trips that they were going on or what they were doing or how they were working out. And I wasn't doing that. And I started to really see it affect how I was treating my wife, how I was maybe just going through my routines and my rituals throughout the day. It was really affecting it. So I just decided to take it off my phone for a little while. And I've been about a month and a half in now. And it feels really good. I don't feel like I have to get on my phone and scroll every day and see what everyone else is doing. If I really care that much, I call them. So,
there you go.
Yeah, right. It's helped. That's another podcast, probably. Call your friend. But I think it's been a really helpful just practice or season for me to be able to not constantly be comparing myself to what other people are doing. Now, it doesn't mean those things are necessarily bad,
course.
but it's just so hard to be in that for more than 20, 30 minutes and not to compare yourself to what everyone else is doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then obviously it changes when you get that end of the week, your average daily time on the screen.
There you go, right?
I mean, during the quarantine, and again, we're still somewhat quarantined, but there were times where it would say 6 hours a
Oh my
day.
gosh, I know.
Now, some of that was me working, but some
Sure.
of that was just me scrolling. And I
Right.
was thinking about this as we were even preparing for this conversation. What would it look like if we spent even half of the time that we're scrolling each day and replace that scrolling time with actually an investment of energy into achieving the thing that we're jealous of?
It's great.
Or achieving the thing that we're trying to compare. So say you do spend 3 hours a day on social media, scrolling, comparing, thinking. And again, a lot of it's educational. There's some great things happening there. But what if I did just an hour and a half a day and then reinvested those 90 minutes in becoming the very thing that I'm sitting there scrolling, hoping magically that someday I'll wake up having become?
One of the things I feel like you've taught me is to really evaluate my time. And that's something I continue to do. And even as you say that, I was just reminded of how easy it is to spend time on things that are not helping you become the best version of yourself. And I think this conversation, comparing yourself, yes, it's social media, we do it, but I think even in our own thoughts and even in our own laying in bed at night, or maybe when you wake up in the morning, I think the phone, social media is a catalyst to that, but it continues throughout the day. So
let's end with that.
Yeah.
So whatever is a catalyst for you to produce positive change, pursue it.
Yeah, that's good.
That which is draining, that which is contradicting your journey or conflicting with your journey and becoming the best version of you, get rid of it.
Yeah.
And beginning with, of course, this notion, stop comparing yourself. For life coaching, consulting services, or to hire a keynote speaker, please visit dmbcoaching.com.